At 85, the tragedy of Ally MacGraw is beyond heartbreaking. At 85, Ally MacGraw no longer hides the truth. For decades, she was Hollywood's golden girl, the innocent beauty whose tear-stained face and love story defined a generation. But behind those iconic words, love means never having to say you're sorry, was a woman trapped in a love that demanded her silence, her freedom, and nearly her soul. In her youth, she embodied purity and hope. In her marriage, she lived something closer to a quiet war. When she fell for Steve McQueen, the man the world adored as the king of cool, she believed she had found forever. Instead, she discovered how love can devour you from the inside. The tabloids called it passion. Hollywood called it fate. But Ali would later call it something else entirely: survival. The man who made millions dream of rebellion was, in private, a storm of jealousy, control, and unhealed scars. And the woman who once ruled every magazine cover would vanish for years, lost behind the walls of his shadow. Now, at 85, she finally tells the truth about what it meant to love Steve McQueen, the loneliness, the addiction, the surrender, and the strange grace that came only after losing everything. This is not the love story you thought you knew. This is the untold tragedy of Ally MacGraw, the woman who gave up the world for love and spent the rest of her life learning how to take it back. But the darkness behind their Hollywood fairy tale was only beginning to surface. The rise of Ally MacGraw and the shadow waiting behind the spotlight. Before she became the symbol of Hollywood innocence, Ally MacGraw was simply Elizabeth Alice MacGraw from Bedford Village, New York, a child who learned early that silence could sometimes mean survival. Her father, once an artist filled with promise, battled alcoholism and violent temper. Her mother, a creative but exhausted woman, often found herself trying to keep the family from collapsing. Amid the shouting, the little girl would slip away to sketchbooks and daydreams, building an inner world where beauty was safe and love was kind. But life has a dark sense of irony. The girl who escaped into make-believe would grow up to live a life more cinematic than any script filled with fame, temptation, and heartbreak that could make a tragedy weep. After college, she entered the New York fashion scene not as a glamorous icon, but as a production assistant fetching coffee for photographers. Yet within months, her poise and quiet magnetism caught the eye of Diana Vreeland, the legendary Vogue editor, who declared, "She doesn't pose, she breathes the camera." That sentence rewrote her destiny. Modeling led to commercial work, then film auditions. Her first real break came with Goodbye Columbus in 1969, a film that turned her into the new face of sophisticated innocence. But it was Love Story that made her immortal. Released in 1970, the film earned over $100 million worldwide and crowned her Hollywood's newest queen. With her soft voice, doe eyes, and gentle gravity, Ally MacGraw became an emblem of fragile perfection. The world thought she had everything. She was married to Robert Evans, the magnetic Paramount producer who was reshaping American cinema through Rosemary's Baby and The Godfather. Together, they looked untouchable power, beauty, and art entwined. Their Beverly Hills home was filled with laughter, fame, and the promise of forever. When their son Joshua was born, photographers described them as Hollywood's golden family. Yet, like a classic Greek tragedy, this perfection was a fragile mask. Ali was already beginning to sense a restlessness that no fame could quiet. The endless parties, the red carpets, the expectations, they were all dazzling cages. Evans adored her, but his own demons, infidelity, cocaine, obsession with success, cast long shadows across their home. And while Ali smiled for the cameras, she was already wondering what it might feel like to live freely, even if that freedom came with risk. In 1972, that risk arrived in the form of Steve McQueen. He was the antithesis of Evans' rugged, where Evans was polished, silent where Evans was talkative, dangerous where Evans was charming. On the set of The Getaway, he was magnetic, a man whose very stillness seemed to hum with energy. Ali once said, "When Steve entered a room, men, women, and children all turned their heads. The chemistry was instant, reckless, overwhelming, and destructive." What began as a cinematic partnership became an emotional earthquake that would shatter her marriage, her career, and nearly her identity. The cameras caught two people falling in love. What they didn't capture was the cost. Because Steve McQueen didn't just want Ally MacGraw's heart, he wanted her entire world. And the woman who had once been the most desired actress in Hollywood was about to disappear, piece by piece, into the shadow of the man who couldn't stand to share her light. But before that disappearance, there was still the illusion of a dream, a romance so intoxicating it would make the world believe in it, even as it began to burn from within. Long before the flashbulbs, before Love Story, before the gilded chaos of Hollywood, there was a lonely little girl in Bedford Village, New York. Her name was Elizabeth Alice MacGraw, but everyone called her Allie. She would grow up to embody poise and grace, yet her childhood was anything but peaceful. Her father, Richard MacGraw, was a talented artist with a temper that could fill an entire room. Brilliant but unstable, he battled alcoholism and violent outbursts. Her mother, Frances, also an artist, had given up her own ambitions to keep the family afloat. The household was a storm of creativity and chaos, where love and fear shared the same table. In her memoir, Moving Pictures, Ali described her father as the most fascinating and the most frightening man I ever knew. He was passionate about art, about ideals, but also consumed by rage. Sometimes, after one of his rants, he would sit in silence for hours, sketching, as if trying to redraw the life he couldn't control. For young Allie, that volatility left scars. She grew up walking on eggshells, learning to read moods the way other children learn to read books. It made her intuitive, empathetic, but also deeply insecure. She once said she spent her entire youth trying to earn peace by being perfect. That quiet hunger to be loved without pain became the invisible engine of her life. At school, she was bright and restless. Her beauty made her stand out, but she hated attention. Teachers saw her as gentle, a bit distant, with eyes that seemed to belong to an older soul. When other girls talked about dances and dresses, Allie dreamed about faraway places, about escape. Her mother, recognizing her daughter's artistic leanings, encouraged her to pursue design. After college, Ali entered the world of fashion, a world that promised elegance but thrived on control. She worked as an assistant for Harper's Bazaar, fetching coffee, organizing shoots, and absorbing the quiet lessons of power and performance. She saw how women could be adored one moment, dismissed the next, how their beauty was both currency and curse. That contradiction fascinated her. She began modeling not because she craved fame, but because she saw it as a way out. It was there that Diana Vreeland, the legendary Vogue editor, noticed her. She has that rare quality: the camera doesn't just like her, it listens to her. Allie's face began appearing in ads, then magazines. But what the world saw, serenity, grace, that unshakable calm, was really the armor of a woman who had spent a lifetime managing chaos. Every pose, every soft smile, was an act of quiet control. That need to control how others saw her would later become her downfall. Because when she met men who were louder, wilder, and more dangerous, men like Robert Evans and Steve McQueen, she mistook their intensity for love. She believed that chaos was passion and that surrender was devotion. Her early years had taught her something poisonous yet familiar: that love was something to survive, not something to rest in. When she entered Hollywood, it wasn't ambition that drove her. It was the search for safety. Ironically, she found herself in the most volatile industry on earth. Friends from her modeling days later recalled how naive she seemed amid the shark-filled waters of Los Angeles. Ali believed in goodness, one said. She thought talent and sincerity would protect her. Hollywood doesn't work like that. In 1969, when she met Robert Evans, the suave, silver-tongued studio executive who ruled Paramount, she thought she had found both love and shelter. Evans adored her, elevated her, and made her a star. He saw not just her beauty, but the quiet mystique behind it. He once told a reporter, "Ali doesn't act, she exists, and the camera falls in love." And in They Were Dacked and Foreman, that same year she filmed Goodbye Columbus, and suddenly the industry was on fire with her name. But success, to Ali, always came with guilt. She feared outshining others, feared being undeserving, feared above all being abandoned. When Love Story came in 1970, the world thought it was watching a perfect union between art and destiny. Ali MacGraw, the beautiful, tragic heroine, had finally found her place. But destiny, it seemed, had darker plans. Because the little girl who had once tried to please an angry father would soon try to please an angry husband, and later a man who would demand even more. And when that man arrived, it wasn't fate knocking at her door. It was fire. Next, we'll step into the moment that changed everything when Ali met Steve McQueen on the set of The Getaway, and the world's most beautiful romance began to rot from the inside out. By the late 1960 seconds, Hollywood was reinventing itself, shedding its golden age gloss for something rawer, more dangerous, more human. And right in the middle of that transformation stood Ally MacGraw, the model-turned-actress whose face seemed to capture an entire era's ache for innocence. She didn't have to shout or seduce. Her quiet sadness was the seduction. Her debut in Goodbye Columbus, 1969, made critics fall in love. The New York Times called her a revelation, vulnerable and sharp, like glass wrapped in silk. She won the Golden Globe for Most Promising Newcomer, and in a heartbeat, she was no longer an assistant fetching coffee, she was a name that mattered. Then came Love Story in 1970, a phenomenon that shattered expectations. The tagline, "Love means never having to say you're sorry," became a generational mantra. The movie grossed over $100 million, and Ally's performance as Jenny Cavallari turned her into the it girl of the decade. She was nominated for an Oscar. The press called her Hollywood's new Grace Kelly. For once, it seemed the girl from Bedford Village had outrun her shadows. And waiting at her side was Robert Evans, the powerful Paramount producer who had helped shape her success. Evans was smooth, magnetic, and dangerous in a different way. The kind of man who could charm a room and conquer a studio in one breath. They had married in 1969, and to the outside world, they were the golden couple of the new Hollywood. Evans built empires. Ally completed them. Together, they were untouchable, or so it seemed. But beneath that polished exterior, there was tension. Evans's career was booming, but his marriage was fraying under the weight of ego, insecurity, and cocaine. Hollywood was never built for harmony. It fed on excess, secrecy, and temptation. And temptation was about to walk straight into Ally's life, wearing a leather jacket and a dangerous smile. In 1972, Evans produced The Getaway, an action thriller directed by the wild, unpredictable Sam Peckinpah. He thought it would be good for Ally, a new kind of role, something bolder, sharper. Her co-star would be Steve McQueen, the biggest box office star in the world, the king of cool. It was a decision that would change everything. Ally hesitated. She had a young son, a fragile marriage, and an uneasy feeling she couldn't quite name. But Evans insisted. And when she met McQueen on set in Texas, hesitation turned into electricity. He was 12 years older, rugged, quiet, exuding danger without trying. When he walked onto a set, everyone noticed. The air seemed to tilt toward him. Ally would later say, "When Steve entered a room, men, women, and children all turned their heads. The chemistry between them wasn't acting, it was combustion. Even Peckinpah, a man hardened by Hollywood's chaos, saw it immediately. You can't fake that," he told the crew. And he was right. Within weeks, the lines between fiction and life blurred. The Getaway became more than a film, it became the setting for an affair that would ignite tabloid headlines and end one of Hollywood's most glamorous marriages. Behind the camera, Evans could feel it happening, the slow betrayal captured in real time. By the end of filming, Ally filed for divorce. The gossip columns erupted. The woman Evans had discovered and turned into a star had now fallen for the man he envied most. The betrayal was cinematic and cruelly poetic. McQueen, for his part, was at the height of his power. He was the untouchable rebel, the man who made rebellion itself look beautiful. But behind that myth was a man haunted by his own ghosts, abandonment, distrust, a lifelong hunger for control. He didn't just want to love Ally MacGraw. He wanted to possess her. In July 1973, they married. The press called it Hollywood's wildest love story. But what no one saw was the contract beneath the romance. McQueen demanded a prenuptial agreement that guaranteed she would never seek his money if they divorced, and worse, he demanded that she give up her acting career entirely. At the very height of her fame, an Oscar nominee, a global sensation, a household name, Ally MacGraw vanished from Hollywood. She traded film sets for a Malibu beach house in silence. She later confessed, "He was the biggest movie star in the world, and he didn't want me to work. Out of love and fear of losing him, I gave up everything." She had walked into the same emotional trap she'd known since childhood, believing that if she sacrificed enough, she might finally be safe. But this time, the cost wasn't peace. It was herself. For a while, they lived the illusion. Barbecues on the beach, long drives up the coast, the camera lenses catching glimpses of perfection. But behind those photographs was a woman who had stopped being seen. The industry moved on without her. New stars rose. The world that once revolved around her name forgot her face. She was no longer Ally MacGraw, movie star. She was simply Steve McQueen's wife. And soon, that title, like everything else, would start to hurt. For a brief, blinding moment, Ali MacGraw lived inside the dream everyone else wanted. She was the star of Love Story, an Oscar nominee, a style icon whose face could sell everything from Chanel to cinema tickets. Yet, within a year of marrying Steve McQueen, she had quietly disappeared not into scandal, but into silence. To the public, they were the perfect couple, the angel and the outlaw. Hollywood's glossy magazines couldn't get enough of them, barefoot at Malibu barbecues, laughing under the sun, two beautiful rebels building their version of paradise. But as the waves crashed against the shore, something darker was stirring inside that house of sand and glass. Steve McQueen had lived his whole life on the edge, abandoned by his father, beaten by stepfathers, and raised by the streets. He had built his career on control of machines, of stunts, of people. His need to dominate came from fear. And Ali, with her gentleness, became both his refuge and his target. At first, she tried to soothe him, believing love could heal the fractures in his soul. She gave up acting because he asked her to. She stopped attending premieres. She canceled interviews. She turned down roles that could have cemented her legacy, including one that later won an Oscar for another actress. McQueen, the biggest movie star in the world, didn't want a wife who worked. He wanted one who waited. He was the center of everything, she admitted years later. I played cook, cleaning lady, simple woman to the hilt. In those words lies the quiet tragedy of a woman who once conquered Hollywood and then was reduced to the walls of a beach house. Her days became an endless rhythm of small domestic rituals, cooking his meals, cleaning his gear, tending to her son, and waiting for him to come home, sometimes calm, sometimes furious, sometimes not at all. Jealousy was his constant shadow. He'd accuse her of flirting with waiters, of dressing too nicely for errands. The man adored by millions could not stand to share the gaze of one. Yet, in the cruelest irony, McQueen himself was notoriously unfaithful. His affairs were whispered through studios and parties. He made no effort to hide them. When confronted, he'd go cold silence as punishment. Ali learned to stay quiet, to not cry, to not question, to not leave. She was trapped by love, and by fear of losing the man who had already begun to lose himself. Because McQueen's inner demons had started clawing their way out. The same fire that made him magnetic on screen made him unbearable off it. He drank, he disappeared for nights, he brought danger home with him. Ali tried to keep peace, to be the stillness in his storm, but the stillness turned into suffocation. To the public, they were legends. To each other, they were ghosts living in the same house. She once described it like this: "There were wonderful days and there were dreadful days. I adored him, and I was terrified of him." The cost of that terror was visible in her eyes. Old friends from the industry who visited her in Malibu said she seemed like a painting, beautiful but frozen. Her career calls stopped coming. Her name faded from casting lists. The woman who had once defined Hollywood's idea of love had become invisible. And yet, despite the suffocating control, Ali never painted McQueen as a monster. She saw him for what he truly was, a man broken, long before she met him. He was a little boy inside, she said softly in an interview. A little boy who didn't know how to trust that love could stay. But love that tries to save someone drowning often ends up sinking too. By 1975, the cracks in their marriage had deepened beyond repair. His addictions worsened. His paranoia grew. The house that once felt like sanctuary now echoed with distance. One night, after another round of accusations and silence, Ali realized something terrible. She had spent years trying to hold on to a man who had never truly been hers. She wasn't even sure she knew who she was anymore. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't see the woman from Love Story. She saw someone smaller, quieter, afraid. Still, she stayed a little longer. Because that's what people like her children of chaos, seekers of peace, always do. They stay, hoping that this time, love will be enough. But it never was. By the mid-1970s, their marriage was already over in everything but name. She longed for work again, for something to remind her she was still alive. But when she finally told McQueen she wanted to return to acting, his response was chillingly final. "Then we're done." The next morning, he left not for a day, but for good. And the woman who had given up everything for love found herself standing alone among the ashes of what once looked like paradise. Hollywood would move on without her. McQueen would burn out too soon. And the fairy tale that had once mesmerized the world was now a cautionary tale of fame, fire, and control. Ali MacGraw's story was no longer one of triumph. It had become a warning. Even the brightest stars can vanish if they mistake love for salvation. But the darkness wasn't done with her yet, because after losing her marriage, Ali would also have to face the greatest storm of all, Steve McQueen's unraveling and death, and the haunting aftermath that would follow her for decades. By 1976, the fairy tale had crumbled into dust. The posters still called Steve McQueen the king of cool, but behind closed doors, he was a man imploding. His body, once carved from adrenaline and rebellion, was breaking down under the weight of paranoia, addiction, and rage. And Ali MacGraw, the woman who had once given up everything for him, was now trapped inside the wreckage of that fading kingdom. The Malibu beach house, once filled with music and laughter, had turned silent. McQueen would vanish for nights, his motorcycle roaring into the darkness, returning home with the smell of alcohol and gasoline on his skin. When he spoke, his words were sharp, suspicious, sometimes slurred. The man who had once made her feel alive now made her afraid. Ali, too, had begun to lose herself. Her self-worth had eroded, one argument at a time. Out of love, she had stopped acting, stopped dreaming, stopped existing. And when love began to rot, she reached for the same poison that had comforted her father, the quiet burn of alcohol. In her memoir, Moving Pictures, she admitted, "I drank to forget how small I'd become." Her days blurred together, waking late, tending to her son Joshua, waiting for McQueen to appear, hoping this time he'd be kind. But the kindness came less and less often. His jealousy, once possessive in private, became venomous in public. If she so much as laughed too loudly at a party, he'd leave without a word. And yet, the cruel paradox was that McQueen couldn't let her go either. He wanted her near, controlled, dependent. When she once told him she might return to work, his voice turned to ice. "You go back to acting, we're finished." That moment would become prophetic. By 1977, Ali had reached her breaking point. The silence between them had grown unbearable, and the isolation was choking. She was no longer the young woman the world adored. She was a ghost of herself. In desperation, she accepted a role in Sam Peckinpah's Convoy, a decision that was both rebellion and rescue. When McQueen found out, he didn't shout. He simply walked out. And that silence, colder than any rage, was the sound of their marriage ending. Soon after, they filed for divorce. 5 years of obsession, control, and heartbreak ended with a single piece of paper. Yet freedom didn't bring relief. It brought emptiness. She had loved him wildly, destructively, and now the space he left behind was unbearable. She turned further inward, drinking more, hiding her pain behind quiet smiles. For the first time in her life, no one was controlling her. But she didn't know who she was without someone to please. Hollywood moved on. Roles stopped coming. She was too old for ingenue parts, too famous for character roles. The industry that had once adored her now treated her as a relic of the past. And then, as if the universe wasn't finished testing her. In 1980, just 2 years after their divorce, Steve McQueen was diagnosed with pleural mesothelioma, a rare, brutal cancer caused by asbestos exposure. The diagnosis hit Ali like an echo from a life she thought she'd left behind. Despite everything, the jealousy, the pain, the betrayals, she still loved him. McQueen tried to fight it his own way. He turned down chemotherapy, turned to unconventional treatments in Mexico, and kept working until his body gave out. In November 1980, at only 50 years old, the man who once seemed invincible was gone. When the news broke, the world mourned a legend. But for Ali, it wasn't just the loss of a movie star, it was the final death of a chapter that had defined and destroyed her. She wept not only for him, but for the version of herself she had buried to be with him. Years later, she said quietly, "I wish we had both grown old sober." Those words weren't nostalgia, they were grief disguised as wisdom. Because behind them was the truth. They had both been prisoners of their pain, chained by love that neither could sustain nor surrender. After his death, Ali fell deeper into her own struggle. The silence he left behind became deafening. Without work, without love, without direction, she spiraled further into addiction. Friends worried she would never find her way out. But survival had always been part of her DNA. The little girl from Bedford, who once tiptoed through her father's anger, now faced her own reflection, broken but alive. In 1986, she checked herself into the Betty Ford Center, where she began the long, brutal process of recovery. She wrote later, "I was 47 years old and finally out of excuses. In that place, stripped of glamour and headlines, she learned something. McQueen never did that. Peace isn't given, it's built, one honest day at a time. She emerged sober, humbled, and transformed. The Hollywood lights that once crowned her no longer mattered. The applause was gone, but so was the fear. It would take years for her to speak publicly about McQueen again. When she finally did, her tone was tender but firm. "I loved him very much," she said. "But we were both too damaged to love each other, right?" Her honesty was not an accusation, it was an act of healing. The woman who had once defined cinematic romance had finally told the truth about what love had cost her. Ali MacGraw didn't just survive Steve McQueen. She survived herself. But even after recovery, peace doesn't come overnight. Because after the storm fades, the hardest thing to face isn't the person who hurt you, it's the person you became trying to survive them. When Steve McQueen died in November 1980, the world lost an icon, but Ali MacGraw lost something far more personal. She lost the man who had both consumed and defined her youth, the ghost she had loved and feared in equal measure. Their love had been a fire that burned through everything: her career, her confidence, her sense of self. Now, in the ashes of that fire, she stood alone. For a long time, Ali drifted. The Hollywood machine that had once crowned her as its queen had already moved on to newer faces, younger stars, and louder stories. The woman who had once commanded $1 million a film was suddenly invisible. She tried to work again, a part in Convoy in 1978, a guest role on Dynasty in 1984, but something had shifted. Her face was still luminous, but her spirit was weary. The red carpets no longer felt like home. And beneath the surface, another battle was raging. Alcohol had become her quiet companion, the numbing answer to everything she couldn't say aloud. The glamour of her past was now a burden. Every photograph, every replay of love story, a reminder of who she used to be. By the early 1990 seconds, she was spiraling. Friends described her as lost in a fog of regret and whiskey. One night, staring at her reflection in a bathroom mirror, she didn't recognize the woman looking back. That was the moment she chose to stop running. In 1986, Ali checked into the Betty Ford Center, the same place where Elizabeth Taylor and other Hollywood veterans had faced their own demons. For the first time in decades, she stripped away the myth: no makeup, no cameras, no Steve, no story to perform. Just Ali and the pain she had tried to outdrink. Recovery wasn't instant. It was brutal and slow. But inside those walls, she began to understand something profound: that she had been living her whole life for someone else's approval. Her fathers, her husbands, her lovers, her audiences. She had never asked what she wanted. That realization didn't break her. It rebuilt her. In 1991, she published Moving Pictures, a memoir as raw as it was redemptive. She didn't romanticize her past. She confessed to the rage, the shame, the mistakes. She wrote about her father's violence, her mother's sacrifices, and the silent agony of loving men who needed saving. The book became a bestseller. Critics praised her honesty, but readers, especially women, felt something deeper: relief. Because behind the Hollywood legend, they found someone real. Then, in 1994, Ali MacGraw did something unexpected. She left Hollywood entirely. She sold her house in Los Angeles, packed her car, and drove to Santa Fe, New Mexico, a place of quiet mesas, old churches, and endless sky. There, far from the noise of fame, she finally began to breathe. In Santa Fe, Ali rebuilt her life around simplicity. She learned yoga, meditation, and gardening. She began each morning with silence and gratitude, the kind she never knew in Malibu or Beverly Hills. Her friends said she became radiant again, not glamorous, but peaceful. Sobriety gave her clarity, and clarity gave her purpose. She began working with women's groups and charities, speaking openly about addiction, recovery, and self-worth. Partnering with Ibu Movement, a collective that empowers female artisans around the world, she helped design clothing that celebrated women's strength, a poetic redemption for a woman who had once given up her own power to fit someone else's world. When asked in a 2017 interview what her life felt like now, she smiled and said, "I used to rewrite the past and fantasize about the future. Now I just try to live each day fully. I'm not a victim, not a survivor, just grateful." Ali never remarried. She didn't need to. She had finally learned to be at peace with solitude. In the stillness of Santa Fe, she found what fame, love, and fortune had all failed to give her herself. She remains close to her son, Joshua Evans, her few trusted friends, and to the small community that treats her not as a star, but as a neighbor. The Hollywood lights faded long ago, but the woman beneath them emerged clearer, wiser, and stronger. Because sometimes the happiest ending isn't a new love story, it's learning to love the quiet after all the noise. But even as she found peace, Ali's name would never fully fade. Because Hollywood has a long memory for tragedy, and the legend of Steve and Ali was too haunting to ever truly die. Ali MacGraw's story did not end when the credits rolled on Love Story. It lived on, not in headlines, but in whispers, in memory, in the strange ache of nostalgia that always surrounds the beautiful and the broken. She had been the face of an era, that brief, golden window, when Hollywood still believed in sincerity and tragedy still sold tickets. Yet her real legacy came not from what she achieved, but from what she survived. In the late 1960 seconds and early 1970 seconds, Ali embodied something rare: quiet power. While her contemporaries dazzled with ambition or scandal, she carried herself with grace, intelligent, self-contained, a mystery in motion. She wasn't just another actress. She was an archetype. Her natural beauty, her effortless vulnerability, and her almost spiritual calm created a new standard of cinematic femininity. But that very softness, the thing that made the world fall in love with her, also made her easy to control in an industry that rewarded dominance. Hollywood loves its ingenues, young, fragile, and compliant. And when Ali stopped being that, it didn't know what to do with her. Her decision to walk away from fame at her peak shocked the industry. Executives saw it as career suicide. Feminists saw it as proof of how women were trapped by the men they loved. But Ali herself would later call it something else: a lesson. "I learned that if you give up your voice for love, you lose both," she once said. In many ways, Ali MacGraw became a mirror for the contradictions of her time. In the 1970 seconds woman, caught between liberation and devotion, between independence and the myth of the perfect romance. Her life exposed what Hollywood tried to hide: that behind every love story it sold to the world, there was often a woman paying for it with silence. Even decades later, her presence lingers. The image of Jenny from Love Story, smiling through tears, dying young, loved too much, became one of cinema's most enduring icons. Yet the real woman behind that image lived a longer, harder, braver version of the story. A love that didn't kill her body, but nearly erased her soul. Today, she is celebrated not just for what she once represented, but for what she represents now: survival, authenticity, and grace beyond illusion. Younger generations rediscover her films and find in her something almost forgotten: emotional truth. In an age of filters and spectacle, Ali's quiet honesty feels radical again. Fashion houses still reference her effortless 1970 style: the crisp white shirts, wide-legged pants, natural hair, and unpretentious elegance. Vogue once described her as the eternal cool girl who never needed to try. Yet, beneath that effortless beauty was someone who had fought her way back from the brink, who learned that peace was more valuable than fame. Her partnership with women's collectives, her advocacy for recovery, her humility, these became the second act Hollywood never wrote for her. Far from the sound stages and red carpets, she turned her pain into purpose. And perhaps that's why her name endures. Because Ali MacGraw's story feels timeless, a parable about what it costs to love deeply in a world that profits from illusion. She showed that beauty without boundaries can become a prison, but self-awareness can turn it into freedom. When she reunited with Love Story co-star Ryan O'Neal in 2016 for the stage play Love Letters, audiences wept, not from nostalgia, but from recognition. They were watching two people who had lived long enough to understand what their younger selves could not: that real love is not grand or cinematic. It's fragile, flawed, and fleeting. And when she walked on stage, silver-haired and serene, the applause wasn't just for Jenny, it was for Ali, the survivor. The woman who had loved too much, fallen too far, and somehow quietly forgiven it all. Her legacy isn't a tragedy, it's a transformation. Because while Hollywood remembers her as the girl who said, "Love means never having to say you're sorry," the woman she became understood something far deeper. Love means learning how to forgive yourself. And yet, behind that forgiveness still lingers a question not about fame or romance, but about truth. What does it really mean to survive in a world built on pretending? It's easy to romanticize Ali MacGraw, the luminous eyes, the trembling voice, the woman who made an entire generation believe that love was worth dying for. But if you look closer, her life wasn't about romantic perfection. It was about endurance. About what happens when a woman gives everything beauty, career, soul to a dream that was never meant to last. Hollywood crowned her an angel, then crucified her for being human. And like so many women of her era, Judy Garland, Natalie Wood, Marilyn Monroe, she was caught between adoration and annihilation. Ali didn't crash in flames like they did. Her tragedy was quieter, stretched over years of surrender. She didn't die young, she simply faded, like a film reel left too long in the sun. But maybe that's why her story matters more now than ever. Because unlike so many others, she lived long enough to rewrite her ending. Ali's story reveals the paradox at the heart of Hollywood's mythology. The industry builds its legends on vulnerability, then punishes them for feeling too much. It sells love as salvation, even though, as Ali learned, love can also be a slow unraveling. When she met Steve McQueen, she wasn't naive. She was hopeful. She believed she could heal him, that her empathy could calm his rage. But love isn't medicine, and empathy doesn't cure addiction. It only binds you to the storm. And when the storm passes, you're left picking up your own pieces. There's a haunting symmetry in their story. Two damaged souls drawn to each other like moths to flame, both too proud to ask for help, too famous to be honest, and too broken to last. He sought control to fight his fear of abandonment. She surrendered control because she feared the same thing. Two sides of the same wound. Yet even after all the wreckage, she never spoke with bitterness. She didn't deny the darkness. She named it and forgave it. That kind of grace isn't cinematic, it's something harder, quieter, and infinitely more real. At Celebrity Forgotten, we've told countless stories of fame that burns too hot, of lives shattered by the weight of spotlight and love that devours instead of redeems. But Ali MacGraw stands apart because her tragedy didn't end her, it transformed her. She walked away from a $1 million career, survived the world's most volatile marriage, faced addiction, and came out the other side still believing in kindness. That isn't weakness, that's power disguised as humility. Her legacy reminds us that survival isn't about staying unscarred, it's about living with the scars and still choosing gentleness. Ali once said, "We are all works in progress, every single one of us." Maybe that's the truth. Hollywood always hides that the most beautiful people are the ones still learning how to forgive their own stories. So was Ali MacGraw a victim of her time? Maybe, but she was also a pioneer of her own kind, a woman who refused to let pain define her. In the end, her life stands as both mirror and warning, a mirror reflecting the illusions we chase, and a warning about what happens when we confuse adoration with love. And perhaps that's why her story still haunts us, because we all see a little of ourselves in her longing to be loved, her fear of losing it, and her courage to finally let it go. But one last truth remains, one final echo from that era of fragile dreams and endless beauty. Time has a strange way of softening even the sharpest edges. When we look at Ali MacGraw, now silver hair shining under the New Mexico sun, eyes still carrying that impossible mix of sorrow and serenity, we no longer see the ingenue who made the world weep. We see a woman who lived through the script Hollywood would never dare to write. Once, she was the symbol of love itself. Now, she is the proof that love can break you and still make you wiser. Her beauty was never her tragedy, her belief in goodness was. She entered an industry that rewards masks, not honesty, and dared to be transparent. That is why we remember her. Not because she was flawless, but because she was brave enough to admit she wasn't. In an age obsessed with reinvention, Ali didn't chase youth or relevance. She chose something rarer, stillness. She built a quiet life where silence healed more than applause ever could. And in that stillness, she finally found what she had been searching for all along: peace without permission. Sometimes when people see her today, they ask what it's like to have been a legend. She just smiles, that same half smile that once broke hearts, and says she feels lucky simply to be alive, to still be learning, still becoming. It's ironic that the woman who once defined cinematic love ended up teaching the world something far more enduring than romance: forgiveness. Forgiveness for the people who hurt us. Forgiveness for the illusions that blinded us. And most importantly, forgiveness for ourselves. Ali MacGraw's life is not a tale of failure or fall. It's the rare Hollywood story that ends in clarity, the kind that only comes when the lights fade, and all that's left is truth. The little girl who feared her father's anger. The actress who gave up her voice for love. The woman who lost everything and still found herself again. It's all one story, one unbroken thread of resilience, stretching quietly through the years. And maybe that's the real love story, not the one written by screenwriters or immortalized in film, but the one written in scars and silence, in letting go, and in finally coming home to oneself. Because not every legend burns out. Some simply walk away into the desert, into the light, into peace. Some stories were never meant to be known. But now,